A perfectly pristine living room sits in complete silence. The timeline of this entire event contains exactly 41 minutes of terrifying, unaccounted empty space. Someone had come to the house, disabled the electronic eyes, and left a physical trace of violence, all while leaving the inside of the home completely untouched. The investigators were now standing at the edge of a massive, terrifying void. They needed to know exactly what happened after the front door closed at 9:50 p.m. The physical evidence at the scene was frustratingly sparse, but investigators quickly realized that the true story of that night was written in invisible digital code. They immediately subpoenaed the server logs for the home security systems and the medical monitoring applications. What they uncovered was a terrifyingly precise timeline of a targeted extraction. The digital breadcrumbs began to form a picture of cold, calculated movement in the dead of night. For nearly 4 hours after her family left, the electronic log showed absolute normalcy. But at exactly 1:47 a.m., the narrative took a violent turn. According to data retrieved from the network, the front doorbell camera, the same camera found violently ripped from its mount, was abruptly and permanently disconnected. Every second of those 41 minutes holds a terrifying secret. The video feed did not just drop due to a network error. It was manually and forcibly killed at 1:47 a.m. This was the exact moment the perimeter of the home was breached. The house was now officially blind from the front, but the intruder made a critical error in their assessment of the property security web. They missed a secondary electronic eye. At 2:12 a.m., exactly 25 minutes after the front camera was destroyed, a separate camera mounted high on the roof of the property activated. This roof camera was triggered by physical movement below. It recorded a brief, shadowy disturbance in the dark, confirming that the area around the house was actively occupied by an unknown presence. The intruder was still on the premises, moving quietly in the freezing desert night. And then came the most chilling digital timestamp of the entire investigation. The neighborhood slept peacefully while a nightmare unfolded on that porch. Nancy relied on a smartphone application to continuously monitor her heart rhythm via her pacemaker. This connection requires close physical proximity between the phone and the medical device. At exactly 2:28 a.m., the application registered a total loss of connection. The pacemaker and the smartphone were separated by a distance too great for the Bluetooth signal to reach. The heartbeat was literally disconnected from the network at 2:28 a.m. The timeline was now brutally clear. From the moment the front camera was killed at 1:47 a.m. to the moment the pacemaker lost connection at 2:28 a.m., exactly 41 minutes had elapsed. 41 minutes to navigate the property, execute a plan, and vanish with an 84-year-old woman. This case is rapidly shifting from a bizarre missing persons report into the territory of a highly organized surgical abduction. If you are tracking this forensic timeline as closely as the federal agents are, take a second to like this video so the algorithm knows you demand deep, analytical, true crime content. The stark contrast between the violent exterior and the serene interior is the first true. The sheer precision of this 41-minute window is staggering. The attacker did not wander in aimlessly. They disabled the primary threat, the front camera, then spent 25 minutes moving around the property before finally separating the victim from her phone and fleeing. The blood on the porch suggests the encounter happened at the threshold. Did the intruder wait outside for those 25 minutes? Did they lure her to the door? The data points form a perfect chronological cage, but they do not show the faces or the methods inside that cage. The digital witnesses provided the framework of a nightmare, but investigators needed physical proof to identify the monster moving within it. They needed to find out who was in the shadows at 2:12 a.m., and they needed to find them before the lack of daily medication turned a kidnapping into a homicide. The digital timestamps provided the when, but investigators desperately needed the who. With the primary front camera destroyed at 1:47 a.m., the Pima County Sheriff's Department, within that incredibly narrow window, a supposedly secure suburban fortress was breached and a vulnerable resident was taken. Now working closely with specialized agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, began a massive sweep of all auxiliary video data. They pulled footage from neighborhood surveillance systems, traffic cameras on the main arteries leaving the Catalina Foothills, and the surviving roof camera on the property. Sheriff Chris Nano schedules to 10 to firmed the intense collaborative effort, stating that every available resource was being deployed to track the missing woman. When technical analysts began reviewing the archived footage from the days immediately preceding the attack, they found something that elevated the threat level from a spontaneous crime to a premeditated hunt. The video files revealed a chilling pattern of behavior. The security cameras had captured footage of an alleged suspect physically scouting the property prior to the night of the disappearance. The images showed a man deliberately obscuring his identity. He wore a mask pulled tight across his face and thick gloves on his hands. In these preliminary scouting runs, the suspected individual was observed moving stealthily around the perimeter of the home. Maybe someone watching this right now knows exactly what belongs in that dark gap of time. Studying the layout, identifying the camera locations, and testing the boundaries of the security system. During these prior visits, he was not carrying anything. He was simply mapping the terrain. However, on the night of February 1st, the night the cameras were blinded and Nancy vanished, the footage captured a terrifying change in his equipment. The masked and gloved suspect returned to the property, but this time he was carrying a large backpack. The presence of the backpack transformed the surveillance video from a record of trespassing into a record of intent. He had brought tools. He had brought a system for extraction. The discovery of the scouting footage proved that this was not a crime of opportunity. The attacker had stalked the 84-year-old woman, analyzed her vulnerabilities, and selected a specific window of time to strike. This level of dedication requires a powerful motive, one that investigators were struggling to define. But the suspect, despite his careful planning and masked face, made a critical biological error during his violent assault on the front porch. If you appreciate strict forensic facts over wild internet rumors, hit that subscribe button. Welcome to Seth's Crime Vault, and let us unlock the truth together. While searching the immediate vicinity of the house, evidence technicians meticulously combed through the desert landscaping and the concrete pathways. According to a report by CBS News, this exhaustive search yielded a massive forensic breakthrough. Hidden near the crime scene, investigators discovered a single discarded glove. The style and material of the glove were a direct visual match to the gloves worn by the masked suspect in the security footage. But more importantly, the inside of the glove contained microscopic traces of human biology. Crime lab technicians successfully extracted a viable DNA profile from the fabric. The genetic material belonged to an unknown male. They finally had the biological signature of the phantom who had haunted the Catalina Foothills. The DNA was immediately entered into federal databases, hoping for a rapid hit that would identify the attacker and lead them directly to Nancy. The investigative team now had a suspect profile, a methodical, patient male who scouted his targets, utilized masks and gloves, carried a backpack for tactical gear. The investigation into what happened here relies entirely on digital footprints and the chilling reality of a crime scene that makes no logical sense, and possessed enough physical strength to subdue an adult and remove her from the property within a strict 41-minute time frame. The net was widening, and the presence of the FBI ensured that the search spanned across state lines. The authorities had the genetic code of the perpetrator and a precise timeline of his actions. It seemed as though a resolution was imminent, that the carefully constructed wall of silence surrounding the case was about to crumble under the weight of forensic science. They were hunting a ghost, but the ghost had left behind a piece of himself. However, just as the task force prepared to zero in on this prime suspect, the investigation was violently derailed. The clear path forward was suddenly obscured by a chaotic storm of misinformation and human greed. The focus of the massive manhunt was about to be forcibly shifted away from the Catalina Foothills, dragging the desperate family into an entirely new kind of psychological torture. The absence of chaos inside the residence is precisely what makes the evidence outside so horrifying. As the massive search effort expanded outward from the affluent foothills, the intense media coverage surrounding the case inevitably generated a dark and chaotic byproduct. When a high-profile disappearance dominates the national news cycle, it unfortunately attracts individuals who seek to exploit the tragedy for their own twisted gratification or financial gain. This phenomenon severely complicates an already desperate timeline. Investigators were suddenly forced to divert critical resources away from the primary crime scene to chase down leads that were ultimately nothing more than cruel fabrications. The sheer volume of incoming tips overwhelmed the local dispatch centers, turning the investigation into a monumental sorting task, where the difference between a valid clue and a malicious lie could mean the difference between life and death. The first major distraction occurred on a lonely stretch of highway heading south toward the international border. Law enforcement received an urgent, seemingly credible tip regarding a potential suspect vehicle fleeing the jurisdiction at a high rate of speed. Heavily armed tactical units intercepted a commercial delivery worker who was driving through the small municipality of Rio Rico. It indicates a level of control and planning that goes far beyond a typical home invasion. Located roughly 1 hour away from the original perimeter. The tension during this high-risk traffic stop was immense. Officers approached the vehicle with weapons drawn, firmly believing they might be seconds away from recovering the victim and apprehending a violent kidnapper. The highway was completely shut down. The driver was aggressively detained, pulled from the cab of the truck, and immediately subjected to a rigorous and highly pressurized interrogation process on the side of the road. Every compartment of the vehicle was systematically dismantled and searched. However, after an exhaustive background check, a review of his delivery logs, and a thorough physical search of the cargo area, authorities conclusively determined that this individual was completely innocent. The delivery driver had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, matching a remarkably vague description that led to a terrifying and time-consuming false alarm. Not a single decorative pillow is out of place on the sofa, and the heavy wooden furniture remains entirely undisturbed. This was not a random burglary gone wrong. This was a targeted operation. The roadblock was eventually cleared, but valuable hours had evaporated. While the Rio Rico incident was a case of mistaken identity born from heightened public anxiety, a far more malicious interference was simultaneously brewing across state lines. Detectives monitoring secure communication channels suddenly intercepted a series of terrifying digital messages. Someone was explicitly claiming responsibility for the midnight abduction. This unknown individual sent direct demands for a substantial ransom, threatening to inflict severe harm on the missing woman if their specific financial conditions were not immediately met by the desperate family. For a brief, agonizing moment, this felt like the definitive breakthrough the multi-agency task force desperately needed. A ransom demand finally provides a logical motive and, more importantly, a direct line of communication to the perpetrator. Federal cyber crimes units immediately launched a highly sophisticated operation to trace the complex digital footprint of the extortionist. They painstakingly tracked the internet protocol addresses through a convoluted maze of proxy servers and encrypted networks. The silence of the house was a deliberate part of the design, eventually pinpointing the precise physical origin of the threatening messages to a residential location in Southern California. Federal agents moved in swiftly, executing a raid and apprehending a man named Derek Colella. But the subsequent custodial interrogation revealed a sickening and infuriating reality. The suspect currently sitting in federal custody had absolutely zero connection to the actual crime that took place in Arizona. He had never set foot on the property. He did not know the victim, and he certainly did not have her secured in a hidden location. He was merely an opportunistic predator who had watched the relentless news reports and consciously decided to terrorize an already traumatized family for a potential unearned payout. He was formally charged with sending an imposter ransom demand, a remarkably cruel hoax that actively hindered the pursuit of justice. These fabricated leads are profoundly devastating in a situation where extreme medical urgency dictates the necessary pace of the search. Every single highly trained detective assigned to interrogate the innocent driver or track the California extortionist was a vital resource pulled away from analyzing the authentic. As investigators would soon discover, the answers to this puzzle were not hidden in plain sight, physical evidence left behind in the desert. The investigation was being suffocated by noise. We are seeing the cruel interference of imposters deliberately muddying the waters of a critical manhunt. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think the true motive is when financial gain is clearly not the ultimate goal? Why would someone orchestrate such a high-risk maneuver in a wealthy suburb if they did not want to profit from it. The absence of a real ransom note forces us to look at darker, more personal reasons for this targeted strike. Strip away the noise of the false leads and return to the physical structure of the residence itself. The defining contradiction that keeps federal profilers awake at night is the architectural anomaly of the entry and exit points. This is the core forensic paradox of the entire mystery. The primary entrance was violently attacked, leaving behind a chilling trail of biological evidence and shattered electronic components. The raw force required to disable the heavy-duty lens implies an aggressive frontal assault. Yet, when first responders arrived, the rear exit of the property was found propped entirely ajar, but buried in the invisible signals, bouncing between devices in the dead of night, with absolutely zero signs of forced entry on the lock or the surrounding frame. This creates a terrifying logical puzzle. If an attacker violently breaches the front threshold, why is the back door cleanly unsealed from the inside? How do these two distinct zones of activity connect within the timeline? This glaring inconsistency forces investigators to evaluate two horrifying hypotheses. The first theory centers entirely on psychological manipulation and deception. In this scenario, the assailant deliberately created a massive disturbance at the primary entryway, violently breaking the lens specifically to generate a loud, alarming noise in the dead of night. They then retreated into the shadows, waiting patiently. The victim, startled from her sleep by the sudden commotion at her front door, perhaps felt too terrified to approach the source of the sound. Instead, acting on a primal instinct to escape or investigate cautiously, she navigated through the dark house to the rear exit and opened it herself. We have to look closely at the victim and the environment she trusted to keep her safe. This would perfectly explain the undisturbed nature of the interior space. No chaotic struggle occurred indoors because the violence never actually crossed the threshold. She was successfully lured out into the freezing desert air by a phantom noise, stepping right into a carefully laid trap. If the first theory is correct, the psychological cruelty is unimaginable. It means the attacker understood the exact layout of the home and anticipated the natural human response to a bump in the night. They weaponized her own defensive instincts against her. If she fled to the back to avoid the front, she walked directly into the arms of her captor. The second theory is significantly more sinister and implies a terrifying level of criminal sophistication. It suggests a highly coordinated militaristic strike force involving multiple individuals acting in unison. Under this hypothesis, one element of the team creates a loud, violent distraction at the front porch. The details of her daily life and the technology she relied upon to monitor her health would become the only reliable witnesses to her sudden disappearance, intentionally drawing all the attention and focus to that specific threshold. While the victim is completely paralyzed by the terrifying noise at her front door, a second, silent element seamlessly breaches the rear of the property. This rapid extraction method would require immense tactical precision and prior rehearsal to physically move an adult human being through the residential layout without disturbing a single decorative item or overturning a piece of furniture. It means the lone figure caught on tape was absolutely not acting alone. It means a highly organized team specifically targeted a vulnerable individual, and executed a flawless pincer movement. If the second theory holds true, the implications are equally terrifying for the broader community. A coordinated team executing a flawless residential breach means there is a highly dangerous crew operating in the region. To incapacitate an adult so quickly that they cannot knock over a lamp or scream loud enough to alert a neighbor requires specialized skills. It implies the use of chemical restraints or overwhelming physical force applied instantaneously. It is a device designed specifically to keep a human heart beating and to sustain fragile life. The immaculate condition of the interior is a monument to the efficiency of the attack. It is a terrifying testament to how quickly a life can be uprooted without disturbing the physical environment. The propped open door was simply their exit route, left gaping wide as they vanished into the brush. Reconciling the bloody concrete with the perfectly aligned throw pillows requires accepting that the perpetrator possessed either the cunning to manipulate human fear or the resources to execute a flawless tactical raid. Both answers lead to a deeply unsettling realization about the nature of the threat lurking in that upscale neighborhood. The puzzle of the doorways suggests that the victim never stood a chance against the strategy deployed against her. The initial frantic surge of adrenaline that fueled the massive multi-agency search has now inevitably settled into an agonizing, heavy silence. The immediate geographic area has been completely exhausted. The local authorities, operating under the relentless direction of the Lead County Sheriff, continue to scour the surrounding desert terrain, but in this case, a medical pacemaker transformed into a cold digital witness. Utilizing aerial drones and trained canine units, but the physical trail has completely vanished into the unforgiving sand. Sheriff Chris Nanos has publicly emphasized that the department will not rest until the responsible party is apprehended, stating that the community deserves resolution and the family deserves justice. He has personally overseen the deployment of specialized search and rescue teams combing through dry riverbeds and abandoned structures for miles in every direction. Despite these monumental efforts, the landscape refuses to yield its secrets. The sheer vastness of the Arizona wilderness provides an almost infinite number of hiding places, making the physical search a massive logistical nightmare. The relatives, who were the last to see her safely inside, have fully cooperated with every single request from the tireless detectives. They have submitted to lengthy interviews, provided detailed timelines of their movements, and granted unrestricted access to their personal communications. Because of this total transparency, investigators have officially and unequivocally eliminated them from the suspect pool, allowing the family to focus entirely on the agonizing wait for answers rather than defending their own innocence. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old and lived in the highly affluent and famously quiet neighborhood of the Catalina Foothills in Tucson, Arizona. The entire weight of the investigation now rests squarely on the unidentified male profile currently sitting in a sterile laboratory. The genetic material recovered from the scene represents the most concrete link to the perpetrator, but it is currently nothing more than a string of code, waiting for a match in a vast federal database. This complex process could take days, months, or even years, depending entirely on whether the suspect has a prior criminal record. Every passing minute without a database match deepens the pervasive sense of dread. The weight is excruciating. But the most pressing, unavoidable reality is the extreme medical urgency of the situation. A human body heavily reliant on specific, tightly scheduled prescriptions simply cannot survive indefinitely without that chemical support. The profound lack of vital medication adds a severe layer of dread to the proceedings. For a patient managing complex cardiac issues, the sudden withdrawal of daily pharmaceuticals can trigger catastrophic systemic failures within days. The individuals who orchestrated this complex extraction were undeniably aware of her physical limitations, making their actions even more callous and calculated. This is the kind of community where sprawling desert estates are set far back from the road, insulated by wealth and geography. They did not just steal a person, they stole her fundamental ability to survive. The authorities are acutely aware that they are no longer just fighting against a clever fugitive. They are fighting against biology itself. The complete absence of these crucial supplies elevates the danger level from a missing persons case to a potential homicide investigation with every passing sunrise. Her fragile physical state is the silent, ticking clock that haunts every detective assigned to the task force. The upscale neighborhood remains eerily quiet. The sun continues to rise and set over the jagged mountains, casting the exact same long, dramatic shadows over the affluent estates. The pristine house sits entirely empty, a perfectly preserved snapshot of a peaceful life violently interrupted. The sterile perfection of the empty home stands in stark contrast to the chaotic reality of the ongoing search. It serves as a haunting reminder that true safety is often a fragile illusion. The community is left grappling with the unsettling reality that violence can penetrate the most exclusive enclaves. The carefully manicured lawns and heavily guarded gates offer no genuine protection against a determined adversary. The interior of the house is entirely immaculate, presenting a picture of absolute domestic tranquility. The residents here pay a premium for distance and privacy. The sense of invulnerability that once defined the foothills has been permanently shattered, replaced by a lingering paranoia that forces neighbors to look at each other with quiet suspicion. The investigation remains intensely active, but it is currently moving at the methodical, agonizingly slow pace of forensic science. The authorities have the how and they have the when, but the ultimate why remains completely obscured by the desert night. What dark secret made this specific individual the target of such an elaborate and devastating operation? What this case teaches us about the illusion of suburban security is profoundly disturbing. We have collectively developed a dangerous reliance on the smart home ecosystem, surrounding ourselves with expensive technology, believing that connected lenses and motion sensors create an impenetrable digital shield. But the reality is that electronic monitoring systems are absolutely not active deterrents against crime. They are merely mechanical witnesses that passively record tragedies as they unfold. Nancy relied on daily medication to maintain her health, and her heart was monitored constantly by a sophisticated pacemaker. A highly targeted predator will always find the blind spots in the coverage. Furthermore, the behavioral analysis of the prior visitations observed in this investigation is crucial for understanding the threat profile. Reconnaissance is not the hallmark of an opportunistic, spontaneous criminal looking for a quick score. Taking the time to physically survey a target, mapping the terrain, and testing the perimeter indicates a highly dangerous level of psychological fixation. This was a calculated, methodical hunt. The individual studied the environment, noted the illumination patterns, and waited patiently for the perfect tactical advantage. Technology ultimately provides a false sense of safety when faced with a patient, determined human threat who is willing to exploit the darkest hours of the night. True security requires proactive vigilance, not just reactive surveillance. By analyzing these chilling behavioral patterns, we gain invaluable insight into the psychology of organized predators and the systemic vulnerabilities inherent in modern residential design. Understanding how these sophisticated breaches occur is the first step in dismantling the false comfort of suburban isolation and recognizing the real dangers that lurk just beyond the reach of our porch lights. This piece of medical technology was linked directly to a tracking application on her smartphone, recording every rhythm and every pulse. This case fundamentally challenges our perception of safety. It forces us to acknowledge that an unlocked digital network can be just as compromising as an unlocked physical door when confronted by a truly dedicated adversary. The most formidable obstacle in solving this mystery is not the sprawling desert darkness, but the profound silence of those who might hold the missing pieces. Someone out there recognizes the distinct shape of that masked figure, or perhaps knows exactly why this specific quiet residence was so deliberately chosen for an attack. The case file remains wide open, waiting for that one crucial piece of information to finally break the dam and reveal the truth. The missing time still holds the ultimate answer. Thank you for joining Seth's Crime Vault to pursue the absolute facts of this investigation. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into the evidence. Next time, we will examine a closed file that local police hastily ruled a tragic, straightforward accident right up until a secondary hidden crime scene was suddenly uncovered in the woods. This constant stream of biological data was a routine safety measure for an elderly woman living alone. The truth is rarely what it seems on the surface. Until then, remain vigilant and remember that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in the most peaceful neighborhoods. Stay safe and keep questioning the narratives you are told. See you then. Nancy was also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, a highly recognizable anchor for NBC News. This high-profile family connection added a layer of hidden tension to her otherwise quiet retirement. When you have a direct blood tie to national television royalty, your privacy is always slightly compromised, and your perceived value to bad actors inherently increases. But on the surface, her daily routine was remarkably predictable and safe. She attended online church services, spent time with her family, and enjoyed the peaceful isolation of her desert property. The evening of January 31st, 2026 felt exactly like countless other winter nights. But just feet away, outside the heavy front door, dark blood stains the concrete of the front porch. The temperature in Tucson dropped as the sun set over the mountains. Nancy had dinner with her daughter Annie Cioni and her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni. The meal was entirely normal, completely devoid of any strange conversations or ominous warnings. They drove her back to the Catalina Foothills property, pulling up to the house in the dark. At 9:50 p.m., Tommaso and Annie dropped Nancy off at her front door. They watched her go inside, ensuring she was safely within the walls of her home. They have since been completely cleared by police and ruled out as suspects in any capacity. They were simply family members saying goodnight. At 9:50 p.m., the heavy front door closed and locked. The exterior lights cast long shadows across the driveway. Inside, the house settled into its usual nighttime quiet. Above the doorway, the primary security camera hangs uselessly, its wires violently torn from the mounting bracket. Nancy was secure in her affluent neighborhood, protected by locked doors, security cameras, and a device regulating her very heartbeat. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. The sprawling properties of the foothills provide ample cover for anyone wishing to remain unseen. The native landscaping, the thick brush, and the deliberate lack of streetlights to preserve the night sky create vast blind spots. For an elderly woman requiring daily medication, this isolation means that if something goes wrong, help is not immediately next door. Her survival depended heavily on her routine and her electronic tethers to the outside world. The moment Tommaso and Annie drove away at 9:50 p.m., those tethers became her only lifeline. The steady, mechanical rhythm of her pacemaker continued to log data, unaware that the environment around it was about to change drastically. But the deep silence of the Catalina Foothills that night was not a protective barrier. It was a carefully chosen stage for an ambush. The isolation that made the neighborhood so desirable was about to become its greatest vulnerability. This profound physical contradiction is the foundation of a mystery that continues to baffle federal investigators. The darkness outside was not empty. Someone was waiting for the family to leave. Someone was watching the lights turn off one by one. The quiet descent into night was merely a countdown to an event that would shatter the illusion of suburban safety forever. The trap had already been set, and the bait was simply the illusion of an ordinary evening. The first sign of the impending nightmare did not come in the form of a loud crash or a desperate phone call. It arrived as a subtle disruption of a deeply ingrained digital habit. Nancy Guthrie was a woman of routine, and Sunday mornings had a strict schedule. At 11 a.m. on February 1st, she was supposed to log on to her computer to attend her regular online church service. Her digital presence at this specific hour was a reliable anchor point in her week. But 11 a.m. came and went, and her account remained entirely inactive. How does an 84-year-old woman vanish into the freezing cold night without causing even the slightest disturbance inside her own home? No login was recorded. No connection was made to the virtual congregation. This single missed appointment was a glaring anomaly that immediately triggered alarm bells for her family. By noon, the concern had metastasized into genuine fear. The family drove back to the Catalina Foothills property the exact same route they had taken just 14 hours earlier when they dropped her off. The desert sun was now high and bright, illuminating the quiet street. They walked up to the residence, expecting perhaps to find her resting or dealing with a minor technological issue. Instead, they found an environment that defied all logical explanation. They unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was completely empty. They called out her name, but only silence echoed back from the pristine walls. They walked from room to room, searching for any sign of a medical emergency. There are no signs of a struggle in the hallway, no overturned chairs in the dining room, and no shattered glass on the expensive rugs. There was no one on the floor. There were no pill bottles spilled on the counter. The living space was perfectly orderly. But as they moved toward the rear of the property, the illusion of safety shattered completely. The back door of the house was not just unlocked. It was propped wide open, letting the cold desert air flow freely into the meticulously kept interior. An open door in a secure home is a universally terrifying sight, especially when the resident is an 84-year-old woman requiring daily medication. Panic immediately set in. The family dialed 911, reporting a missing person and detailing her urgent medical needs. Law enforcement officers from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived swiftly, their cruisers shattering the silence of the affluent neighborhood. The initial walkthrough by the deputies confirmed the family observations. The inside of the home offered absolutely zero clues. It was a vacuum of evidence. The deputies noted the perfectly arranged furniture and the distinct lack of any struggle. Yet the violence outside suggests a rapid and brutal encounter. But when investigators stepped outside to examine the perimeter, the narrative of a simple, wandering elderly woman evaporated instantly. They walked to the front porch, the very spot where Nancy had said goodnight to her daughter and son-in-law. There, starkly visible against the concrete, was a smear of fresh blood. The officers looked up. The primary security camera, designed to monitor anyone approaching the front door, was severely damaged. It had been violently ripped from its casing, the wires dangling uselessly in the afternoon breeze. The scene instantly transformed from a medical welfare check into a massive federal mobilization. The local authorities immediately recognized the severity of the situation and the resources it would demand. The pristine interior suddenly felt less like a safe haven and more like a staged diversion. The violence had been contained entirely to the exterior thresholds of the home. The blood on the porch and the blinded camera told a story of a sudden, aggressive interception.